The Earth, just like a human, occasionally gets fevers in the course of, usually, of dealing with an infection or some problem that has occurred. In other words, it's not deliberately making things hot just to remove us, but just as you, when you get a fever, warm up. It's part of your body's response to a problem, and it's the same with the Earth.
The problem is what is happening with democracy in our times. It's no longer this old democracy focused on justice, equality, unconditioned participation of everybody in public life. Our democracy is segregation, gated communities. The practical effect of globalization is that new walls are popping up all around. United States building walls on the frontier of Mexico and so on. That's the reality of globalization.
Le frontiere sicuramente cambiano di significato.
Frontiers have progressively changed their meaning. Today, they are more and more functional. In the economical field, they want frontiers to be eliminated to facilitate exchange. Frontiers are an obstacle when you set out to make money, especially in a globalized economics. For people, by contrast, boundaries are still kept. This is a contradiction with respect to migrating dynamics. Liberalization is incompatible with control of movements.
Hermetic walls don't seem to work in this world of ours. It works rhetorically for those who want to control the border, state, some politicians. Very powerful. But it also works rhetorically in making those who want to come in feel that they are violating something, that they are violating a country, not just crossing a border informally, but violating a nation state. Hey, that's a heavy burden. You know, I don't want to have it.
Questo processo di globalizzazione
This globalization process does not extinguish other cultures, because it takes a long time for other cultures to disappear. Yet, it has repercussions between young and old people. Young people are willing to move, so they already have a pre-existing conviction that they don't have to accept their culture the way it is. When they realize that life somewhere else might be better, they move to find their own, new identities.
We all belong to some form of culture. We absorb this culture through the education that we receive in childhood. It is related to our language, then to different landscapes that we live in. Now, what happens is that during migrations of populations, they lose the initial culture, especially the younger ones, the children, but they don't acquire a new culture. Now, this is, of course, a huge danger, because it is the destruction of their humanity.
I'm not so concerned about this question of identity. I am much more concerned about membership, the notion that you belong to some political community. When it comes to migrants, to asylum seekers, to refugees, if you're miserable, then you are, in fact, robbed. Your identity doesn't translate. You become invisible. You become a number. You become a problem.
I think we've abandoned a notion of development that is about steady progress that involves building infrastructure, putting in electricity, phone lines, water, building schools. You know, more and more in my travels, what I see is what I call the global green zone, where you have a sort of a bubble where the internationals are and their local partners, right, working with NGOs. So instead of infrastructure, you have an absolute kind of apartheid system of the people with the generators, the bottled water, the cell phones, an expensive, totally privatized infrastructure, and then surrounded by this chaos. This is maybe the future that we're seeing here, the global green zone.
Cities have always had walls, but they were invisible very often. What is interesting today is that the walls are deeply perforated. The walls are not working. So the next step is, of course, all kinds of securitizing, the weaponizing of urban space, the weaponizing of luxury buildings. The gated community is, in a way, the most extreme form. But the weaponizing of urban space is in full It's totally there now. I see this also in a future scenario. I think that the real walls are going to be invisible walls. But if you cross them, you will know it and they will know it. And that to me is a much scarier scenario.
The fever has already started. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that was issued in 2001 warns of all the bad things that are going to happen during this century. If, for example, you live in Iceland, you're in a very fortunate position because that part of the earth is going to warm up, but it's very cold there, so it'll just get better and better. Eventually, it'll be tropical.
The scientific consensus is that climate change can't now be reversed. We can perhaps prevent it from accelerating. But even if the whole world stopped using fossil fuels tomorrow, even if the whole world stopped further destruction of forests and rainforests and so on, there's 100 or 200 years of climate change in the works.
And more, we see the progression of this economic model through disasters. So we're now in a cycle where the economic model itself is so destructive to the planet that the number of disasters are increasing, both financial disasters and natural disasters. But if we think about hurricanes, earthquakes, they've increased dramatically in recent years. In the past 20 years, the number of market crashes has also increased.
If you live in the middle of Europe or here in America, things are going to get very bad indeed. It's going to get so hot in the summer that crops won't grow, so you won't have food. And you won't get it from the rest of the world either, because they'll all be under the same kind of drought conditions. What will happen, I think, is there'll be mass migration.
We're looking at a system of climate apartheid. The waters are rising, and some people are going to be left to drown, a lot of people. There will be people who will be able to drive out. Not everyone will die. And those people will build their global green zone where Alaska, but this isn't a joke. This is, land in Alaska is getting more expensive. And I think that that's clearly the direction we're going in. I wouldn't say of human extinction, but it is going to be a genocidal logic. I suppose a survival of the fittest, but more what it's about is
Alaska.
me and my friends are going to be fine. We have SUVs.
Sarah Palin?
We have generators. We have air conditioners. We have bottled water, and we bought land in Alaska.
There is a large number of brilliant accountants, brilliant lawyers, and brilliant economists, all totally creative, who are trying to map the ways in which global warming is going to create new opportunities for profit making. But if we think of the melting, the water, the raising of the water level, that will produce refugee flows, because there will be environmental refugees.
Those parts of the world that have strong states will attempt in various ways to control the impact on themselves of issues of migration from parts of the world which are very badly affected. However, it's far from being the case that the advanced world will be immune to large eruptions.
And I think that this environmental catastrophe is going to make quite a few states, especially now we've had a proliferation of states that are not survivable, they cannot survive. They're not sustainable. And it's going to, again, demand from us thinking and innovating in terms of how this legal notion of political membership, what community do you belong to? Because there's enormous reluctance to take in asylum, to take in seekers, to take in refugees.
I think it would be a selection of survivors. Whenever there is something bad happens, like a war, like a big accident, or a tsunami, or a giant storm, anything like that, you find there are people that always freeze on the spot and get killed. And there are others who recognize the warning sign, take action and move and save themselves, and they get selected. And in the course of the warm-up of the earth, this is going to happen. The ones with a sense of survival will migrate and move to. The others will just stay put and hope that something will save them, and it won't.
There is certainly a profound tendency in human beings, which in evolutionary terms was probably very useful to them, to struggle on blindly, hope against hope. Optimism, I'm sure, had profound evolutionary advantages. But in our present situation, realism is more useful.
Let me ask you a simple question. Why do we, even now, with all these reports of global warming, why do we still not take it seriously? We take it